After a decade of trying, failure after failure, the DCU has finally begun. Well, it began with Creature Commandos if you want to get into the minutiae, so the DCU begins again. Now, if you saw my video about the DCEU, you'd know that I'm not exactly the biggest fan of this era for these iconic characters, and a reboot was inevitable. I mean, after each attempt at revamping the DCEU, watching it constantly stumble over itself, it was about time they started from scratch and actually focused on quality instead of just existing just to exist and being mid. Now, I've held the opinion that Superman is a character that has either been deeply misunderstood or misrepresented in media. He's quite literally the blueprint for all superheroes, and I will not allow any arguments against this fact. He set the standard for superheroes and has been since the day he debuted back in 1938. God damn, he's older than Al Pacino.
Everyone wants my Dunkachino. Can't get enough of my Dunkachino.
What was I talking about again? Now, there seems to be this misconception that Superman is a boring character, and a fallacy I do not allow in my household is Superman slander. Yeah, he's basically a fucking Super Saiyan, and yes, he's an alien from another planet, but he grew up with human parents and has lived his life as a human. What makes him interesting is his ability to come to terms with being Clark Kent and Superman, while trying to live a normal life, have relationships, friendships, loss, heartbreak, and despite being attached from society and struggling with who he is, at the end of the day, he is an empathetic person who stands as a figure of hope. So this idea of him being boring and not being able to have interesting stories written around his characteristics, I find to be complete bullshit. And I'm not gonna lie, seeing the trailers for this new movie had me feel in a certain way I haven't felt in a long time. The marketing team clearly had rent fucking due because they had no reason to pop the fuck off the way they did. Nothing but hope and optimism. I have never been hit this hard by a trailer in a long time. And this was my last fuck to give. This movie has the difficult task of restoring my faith in writers and directors to make a movie about a character who has been disrespected over the years. Plus, James Gunn has not made a bad superhero movie in his career, so I figured he'd be the guy for the job. And I gotta say, this movie's a fucking mess. Yeah, I hate to say it, big dogs, but this movie has a lot going on and does not know how to balance every aspect of the story. The movie is structured in a really weird way to the point where it feels like you're watching the second half of a longer movie. There's not a whole lot of connective tissue in the beginning of the movie. It starts at a certain point that's very significant and tells us through text about the events leading up to the scene. On one hand, I appreciate that this movie doesn't give us another look into Superman's origins for the millionth fucking time, but I still would have liked some context as to how he got to this point in the story. It's probably due to the fact that this movie is so fucking bloated that it doesn't have time to allow the characters and the events to play out in a succinct manner. This movie is constantly jumping from new characters and concepts. You don't even have time to understand them or why the events in the story matter. I do appreciate that this Superman is thrown into a situation that seems very unwinnable, and I like that despite being pushed to his wit's end, he still holds on to his convictions and doesn't break due to his struggles and the people who are constantly making his life worse. But again, it just doesn't feel as cohesive as it should have been. There's a certain point in the movie where it starts to feel like Spider-Man 3, where it keeps throwing these new concepts at you and doesn't even bother to build up to or allow the audience time to gravitate towards. The movie's at its best when we see the characters interacting or having genuine moments of conflict. It helps that Superman and Lois's dynamic is genuinely amazing, and I love that it's just two people with completely different lives trying to make their relationship work in a world where it seems impossible. And speaking of Superman, David Corenswet is really fucking good as the character. He plays the role with an insane amount of charisma, and I love that he's essentially just a lovable dork. Rachel Brosnahan brings a confidence and spunk to Lois that I also appreciate, especially when compared to Amy Adams, whose only motivations were centered around Superman or being the only person to chill him the fuck out. She feels like a character who has her own goals and aspirations, and despite her conflicts with Superman, she still manages to contribute to the plot and doesn't feel like a convenience for the narrative. Now, I'll say that the inclusion of the Justice Gang did not help with how messy the film is, but I love that Mr. Terrific of all people gets to be a standout character in a Superman movie. He was one of the only characters who actually had funny dialogue and a stake in the story outside of the leads. And I gotta say that Nicholas Hoult Holt is really good as Lex Luthor. His dialogue feels like it was ripped right out of a comic book. That's kind of James Gunn's wheelhouse. He's so delectably detestable and such a scumbag that it's honestly kind of shocking he doesn't cause Superman to fucking break. Now, as much praise I can give to Nicholas Hoult, the other villains aren't anything special. If you know anything about the character of Ultraman, it's not exactly a shocker what his revelation is. Now, this might change in the future with later installments, but he's nothing more than just a strong guy who punches Superman. And then we have the Engineer, who's also just here because she's the only other character outside of Ultraman who can physically dominate Superman. It's funny how she's kind of an important part of the story, but all she does is hack things, and by the end of the movie, she just fucks off and is never talked about again. Which is a great transition into talking about the editing in this movie, because it is some of the worst I've ever seen in James Gunn's filmography. Don't get me wrong, the action scenes have a lot of fun choreography, and I appreciate that it's not just characters smacking into each other, but there will be moments where the camera cuts in a really awkward place, or the perspective is so fucked up by the wide-angle lenses. It's cool when it's done on Superman, especially when it looks like the camera is struggling to keep up with how fast he is, but it doesn't look great on everyone else. And it's not just with the action. Like I said before, the movie is structured in such a bizarre way that it contributes to how messy it is. If they had just streamlined the script a little more, it wouldn't feel like it was just throwing shit at the screen and jumping all over the place. It's a shame that the movie is as cluttered as it is, because I, for one, was really looking forward to it. What's worse is that there are a lot of amazing moments that showcase how much this movie understands the character of Superman. In a vacuum, I can see the vision James Gunn was going for, and I do appreciate that the movie holds a mirror to the audience, but unfortunately, it cannot get out of its own way for it to be great. It is a very hopeful and optimistic movie, and it does represent Superman's heroism and interactions with other people and how much he truly cares for people very well. It's almost like the creators sacrificed a good movie at the expense of giving people a better representation of the characters. I can see the vision, but it doesn't exactly make for a great movie. There were moments of greatness, and I see the potential in this new DC universe, but this isn't exactly what I'm looking for. I wasn't in love with every concept it introduced, and I can't particularly say that I left the theater satisfied. I didn't hate the movie, but it's not exactly what I would call good. So to wrap this up, I'm gonna give Superman the very okay score of 6 out of 10. Let's hope Fantastic Four is good.
Don't worry, folks. This looks like a job for Super. Whoa! I got it.